So we've invited George once again. I feel very, very honoured from the
Stop it.
TinMen. We've got Susie Bennett, is absolute awesome person. You've got the PhD in mental health and suicide and stuff like that. And you got, I'm sure the rest of you know, all followers know, we've got Ian, we've got Steve Rook. But we get asked quite a lot about, as a charity, what do we spend our fundraising money on? Yeah, we can do the whole thing. Yeah, we run events, we do this, we do that. Yes, we do support other charities. We've supported a lot of money funding other people's charities, helping them get off their feet and helping people get out of the shits. But the one thing what I get extremely frustrated with, and I think everyone else here as well, is the whole world when it comes down to mental health is being more emotional, tell people to talk. If blokes are talking about their mental health, they're doing it in the wrong way. And it absolutely frustrates me. And what is it? 91% of men who've completed suicide did speak to the doctors, they did speak to charities, they did speak to the NHS, and they're dead. Something, and to me, we've all got the messaging wrong. We're not looking at why blokes are taking their lives. And it makes me so angry. It really does. So
just as a precursor to that, really, Dan, that the last video that you, me, and Ian did, where I think yes,
right, okay.
where I think one of the things that we covered off in there was the fact that the NHS just isn't geared up, or it's geared up incorrectly to deal with this sort of stuff, and the fact that really, if you're going to get out of that pity party, as we called it, you need to be a self-starter, which isn't necessarily always the case. You know, and I just kind of wanted to get that in as a precursor to you talking to Susie, really. Yeah, no, because it's just because this is changing how the NHS thinks and does stuff.
Well, and the mental health charities, the men's, women's, it doesn't really matter.
Agreed.
It's about actually looking at stuff rather than everybody regurgitating the same bullshit constantly over and over again. Actually look at why is the process wrong? What can be tweaked? What can be improved? So we as a charity, we've all agreed, and thank you so much, George, for highlighting this in the last video we did before. It's just we've got a highly respected researcher here who's been absolutely, sorry to talk about you like you're not here, Susie, who's absolutely gagging to get funding to do enough to extend your research and make it bigger and better and whatever buzzwords we want to do. So we've decided to step in and pay and help fund it. And again, we could do the whole thing of look how awesome we are. But actually, we're quite a small charity compared to some of those big boys.
Yeah.
Why?
What are they doing?
Yeah, and I don't want to turn it into an us and them, but it's just like,
well, I think it should be though. Like that's the reality of it. Like we're kind of like
I don't see. Yeah,
I mean, if you're doing our weight with this stuff, and actually let's back and support the stuff that matters, that makes a difference. And I think that's like part of the challenge. Like we just said before we even started recording there, Susie, like how challenging you found it to get the funding for this amazing thing that could have a far-reaching consequences in a positive nature and really unpick what some of the real key issues are. And it's not going to be like a one-size-fits-all, but it can make a massive difference to a lot of people. And by your kind of message, you would have done this without the funding. Do you know what I mean? And that's the kind of people we need behind this stuff. But you've struggled to get the funding. That's madness.
Yeah.
Sorry, George, you were going to say something then.
Oh, well, yeah, it's I've always been sort of Susie's unofficial hype man, MC, sort of literally it's more or less the second thing I tell people after my name. And if you've heard of Susie Bennet and the important work she's doing, and I think it very much captures the problem itself, and the sense that the work of Susie's that I'm pretty familiar with and a big fan of should be funded like easily. It shouldn't even have to be asked. There shouldn't even be a request for this, considering suicide is the number one threat to my life and everyone else's life, all the men on this call, and it's a national priority, the biggest cause of risk, biggest risk to my life. And as a researcher leading the fight against that, I don't think that question should even need to be asked. It should be, this is where the fight has been fought. And it's sad that there is so little funding for such a massive problem, and that is a second problem in and of itself, where we just don't seem to want to be part of the solution. And like I said, but the thing is, male suicide is actually in a strange way, like on vogue at the minute, very trendy. Like people are putting it on the back of hoodies and saying all nice things and catchphrases and such, but I rarely see that actually going into the research. I'm seeing a lot of charities and organizations becoming very rich around male suicide, but then I'm also seeing researchers doing very important work having no money. So it's great to see a charity do the right thing, which you are absolutely doing. Like there is no better way to spend money than to give it to Susie Bennet. Genuinely see that. So the fact that you've been able to give her this money so easily and so much of it so generously is like, I feel like just having connected you two, I feel something I'm proud of. And I
No,
haven't done
good on
anything.
you.
It's
Yeah.
not my research or my money, and I'm getting like residual proudness secondhand, and it's like I feel great.
Residual
Just
proudness. I
have
like that.
secondhand mic, and that's like way off the chart. It's
Yeah.
like one of the proudest things I've done as part of the TinMen is just connecting these two parties and knowing that so much good is going to come from it. So thank you
Yeah.
on behalf of
Well,
Susie, who I will let speak for herself.
Yeah, no,
And,
no,
and
actually,
congratulations to Susie. So
that might be an
amazing
idea
quality
actually.
sessions.
Before like, Susie, just tell us about yourself and the research and all this kind of stuff, because it is a crucial thing. We want to see change. My job as the CEO of this charity is to get it shut down because there's no need. That's my job. Will it happen in my lifetime, any of our lifetimes? No, but we can bloody well slow it down. So tell us about yourself. I know you've been in the video before, but
Yeah.
cock wave.
I've just been in, so I've just finished 4 years of PhD study on male suicide. And I guess to present some context, like psychologist Martin Seeger wrote about the fact that suicide statistics started being recorded in, I think, 1861 in the UK. And every single year since 1861, there have been more male deaths by suicide than female. And as George already said, it's the biggest risk factor to all of you on this call. So you would then think, in this context in the climate we live in this conversation we live in about male power, male privilege, you would think that with the issue of male suicide, given its priority, that there would be an abundance, mountains of research on it, because you would be looking out for yourselves and prioritizing yourselves. But there's such little research on it, given the scale of the problem, or there has been. So the PH work that it means that you're inheriting a research landscape where there is so much that needs to be explored. There's so much that needs to be understood. So you're sort of constantly fighting this tension of like, people want answers now. They want, because if you love somebody in crisis, or you're in crisis yourself, you want to know right now, like, what is going to be effective, what is going to be helpful. And at the same time, the danger of that is we start implementing things or using messaging that hasn't been researched sufficiently, that it ends up being counterproductive. So you also need this much more sort of longer term work of that proper robust research to understand what the issues and challenges are. So for me, it has been an unbelievable struggle to get funding. I didn't get formal funding for my PhD. And a PhD, if you're studying full time for 4 years, you've got all your tuition fees to pay, and then you've got to sustain yourself for 4 years of living costs. So you've got to eat, sleep somewhere. And I was lucky to I sent off probably over 1,000 kind of funding letters to people, and I got the two main funders that I ended up getting was an organization called the Liam Brisson Foundation and Jonathan's Voice, which are both organizations set up by families who lost their sons, so in honor of Jonathan and Liam. And that covered about a quarter of my PhD, and so the rest of it I was working alongside doing the studying, which emotionally there just comes a time when it's not
have you ever had just to quickly ask this, you never had any public funding from like a taxpayer or governmental funding? It's always been private.
Yeah.
Sorry, I really had to know.
Dan, you will understand as well that there's also, obviously that would be ideal, but there's a different, I'm always going to be devoted to this issue and going to give it my all, but there's a different kind of responsibility you feel when it's the when you know that the donations are coming from the legacy of somebody's life that has been lost to this issue, like you wear that with a different level of responsibility. And in some ways it's almost, it gives you more courage in a way to be things that maybe for myself, Susie, I would be shy about doing, or like going when George first invited me on his podcast, things that you may be anxious or shy about, you suddenly, there's this different relationship you have with it because it's some people have invested in you this like legacy of honor that you can't really describe, and so you have a responsibility then on behalf of those people as well. So it doesn't just become about you. Like my research never feels like it's just about me. I'll get so many incredible men get in touch with me and share intimacies with me, share some of the complexities and challenges that they face, and I feel their isolation, I feel their despair, and so this work becomes about all of us as a, you know, community. And for me, it's still, I'm still making sense of having to not worry about it for the next 12 months, like to suddenly have the freedom of that, because everybody knows what it's like when you're stressed about, you know, money. And there is, of course, there's an emotional aspect to this work that is, you are processing a lot of time, stories and hearing things that are you know, that you need a beat to sort of regulate through yourself. So then it, you know, having then being able to do that work without the additional load, I'm saying, of like financial stress and everything else, is an unbelievable
Well, it leaves you to concentrate on the matter in hand.
Exactly.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and that's when you're going to get your best work. Like that's when you've got total focus on that to make that bigger difference. Because we all know when you're stressed and you've got things on your mind, you can't focus on what you're trying to do, can you?
Yeah.
No.
And so one of the studies with the PhD as well was to develop, so we've got a research agenda of priorities now, 22 priorities that lived experience experts, so people who, men who are suicidal or people bereaved by male suicide, have told us these are the most important questions that we need to start looking at. So I would love in the long run as well that we build a whole culture of research to start tackling these questions, and researchers that are wanting to look at them. Like that would be thrilling for me, because there's only so much that one person can, you know, could do within a time period, but also, you know, you need those different perspectives and ways of looking at things, different questions to ask. So, you know, I really hope that this is for people listening that are curious about research, like there's a space for you, and there's some hugely important questions that need to be looked at.
Well, I think it's right, because if you stand up, basically nothing's really changed since 1861. The only thing what's changed is the numbers, because the population and everything's going up. Then we've got a big problem, and I think I said this in the video with George. We seem to be just living in a society. We're in the private world, the charity world, arguably even the NHS world and the council's world. Everybody's just regurgitating the same thing, and no one's looking at actually what's the problem. We need to change. We need to change something. The amount of times, like that post on there's a post we put on MANUP about advocacy, kind of say the word, and people just saying, what was it? There was a sister, her brother took his life because he was being abused. I think he was being abused. Was he being abused? Yeah. He was being abused and domestic violence. He went to the police. He went to the doctors. He asked for help, and now he's dead.
Was that the guy that they'd registered his calls? Was it 156 times? Is that chap that you're talking about?
Yeah, no, exactly that. And the thing
156 calls into the emergency services, and nobody took him fucking seriously.
That's how they ID'd him.
That's how they ID'd him. That's right. Yes. Yes.
No, go on, George. Sorry.
I was going to say, well, I guess that in a way represents what I think is going to change with this funding starting now, and also a thing that I've always admired about Susie's work and how I've recognised its importance is that she's sort of giving the microphone over to suicidal men and the families, because in this area of advocacy, suicidal men are constantly spoken over and talked for by other people, often not even men. And often they're sort of used as a political pawn to win arguments. Male suicide is, you see these concepts of patriarchy and toxic masculinity used to explain male suicide, which is just impossible to do, and it won't come through a catchphrase. And I've watched suicidal men used for various different means, personal means and political means and financial means, and never actually listened to, which is crazy because everyone seems to have the answers for male suicide, apart from the suicidal men themselves. Like everyone seems to know why men kill themselves, but then you actually talk to bereaved families, and they often have no idea at all. Like
They don't have a clue, otherwise they'd stop it.
But I'm like, hang on, there's some arsehole on Twitter that said it was toxic masculinity, and he's got all the answers to every single one. He not only the answer to your suicide, but every male suicide. Don't worry, it's 2 words, and it's toxic masculinity. It's like, it's bullshit, and that's why I like Susie's research, and she gives a microphone to suicidal men. And obviously, elephant in the room, Susie isn't a man, so it's amazing that she's giving that space to men, and that, as you know, like the first thing is setting that agenda, literally asking these men and their families, what do you want to know? How can we help? And that's how we arrived at what Susie said, the agenda for male suicide, which is the next steps. And now we know what are the important questions, like number 1, loneliness. So like, where do we go from there? How do we better understand that? And how do we just depoliticize this very controversial issue and just make it a scientific one, and one led by personal testimony and first-hand experience? So that's what I think is changing. And we're actually going to listen to that man, those 42 phone calls or whatever it was. We'll be picking up the phone and actually listen to what he's got to say.
Exactly that. And it's just, I don't know, it's just like little processes where if a man goes to the doctor, I think I might be depressed, and the choices are, here's the pills. And my little caveat, I don't know if that's the right word, is when we've done the video, I always remember, I asked Dr. Carol Savosky, is a video, an older video, I said to him, why are you just giving men, I guess, why are you just giving out antidepressants? Why? He goes, because that's all the resources I've got.
That's his toolkit. That's everything in his toolkit.
Yeah. So for us as a charity, I'm like, okay, well, I feel it, and I get it. It's like, well, here's your happy pills. Then go to this website and self-refer to one of their helplines. I've forgotten what they're called. There's so many of them. You go through to those. They'll have one phone call with you. I've been there. They'll have one phone call, and they'll go, "Oh, how are you feeling today?" And then they'll call you back in 3 days, and you're already feeling a little bit of shit because you know this person is just somebody who's sitting in a call center over and over again,
ticking a box.
Yeah, they'll call you back in 3 days. Oh, how are you feeling today? I'm feeling a little bit better. Oh, well, that's fine. So you don't need therapy. You don't need anything. Off you go. And
unless of course you're Dan, you go to the GP for something else completely.
Well, that's 2 years later. Yeah, absolutely.
And you know exactly what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
And then oh, how are you getting on with your head and all the rest of it? There's a really good charity, and he got referred to his own fucking charity.
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, when I tried to back there, and that was quite nice. But even with that, yeah, we're on the social prescribers. I think it's Ken and a couple of others. I always forget who they are. Is it starting to tally up now and stuff like that? But it's just all doctors. I don't think we can blame doctors for going, at least trying to say, here's some happy pills. Check out MANUP. I get it. Join the Andy's Man Clubs, all this kind of stuff. But something's got to. You can't be said. Well, the thing is, blokes are fixers. Blokes are fixers, and when we can't fix our problems, that's when we make logical decisions. I'm not saying that suicide is a logical decision, but at that moment in time, especially when the wife's gone, the CSA's on their back, or say whatever you want to call them, CSA's on their back, they're about to lose their home, the kids have been trained to hate that child, and all this kind of stuff. There is nothing left for that bloke to stay alive for. So their logical decision, if they're being ignored by society, told they're being toxic, CSA hounding them, and everyone's ignoring them, the logical decision, which is, I stress, isn't
and they feel like shit.
They feel like shit.
That's the kind of the determining factor.
Yeah. Well, and do you know what? I'm going to call it a day. It's an illogical decision, and it is the wrong one. But I totally and utterly get it.
But it's logical to them at the time.
Yeah, and we need to change that.
Well, the more we talk about it, the more we get involved and delve into this stuff, the more you realise that there's such a gap in what's being done and what needs to be done. Like, we are all involved in this field in one way or another and understand how ineffective antidepressants and pills are, no matter how many different kinds and variations there are. Like, so that's just been chucked out willy-nilly because that's the only resource that they've got. That's costing the NHS millions, if not billions of pounds a year. There's other things like the stuff that you're doing to you that can help change that. And that's what we're all about, and want to change and challenge that. And these big pharma companies that are kind of, and they work for some people. I'm not going to say they don't, because there's obviously some degree of effectiveness. So I'm not rubbishing it completely. But like, what's the efficacy rate of this stuff? Like, why isn't that changing? Where's the research going into that? And I don't know enough about this field to think there is, but having a partner who's really struggled with their mental health over the years and seeing the cycle that she just keeps going through, like like Dan said, I understand why you just keep going through that cycle. I keep trying and trying and trying, and you've got tried 90% of stuff. There's one logical step left then, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that many of us who've cared for a loved one in a suicidal crisis will, I mean, part of what brought me into this work was that experience, and seeing how harrowing it is trying to navigate services when you're desperate for help and you just feel like you cannot find anybody to help you. It's absolutely brutal, and it's very difficult because I'm also aware, as we're talking now, like when you're in that state, like hope is the most kind of fragile and distant thing. And obviously I want people listening to feel some kind of hope that things can be different, but there is also the reality of the systems in which we currently operate. And so when people are given very simplistic messages about just go and speak to your GP, just go and talk to somebody, as if that will be the full stop in resolving their pain. And actually what happens is it's in a system that's got much more complicated aspects to it, then it becomes potentially so dangerous. And so this is when the research has a role to play in really understanding the different ways in which different men want to be supported, and really understanding then how do you create interventions and support that fit the need. If you're saying to me, if I'm coming to you with a stomach ache and you're giving me headache tablets, it's going to make no sense to me to start taking the headache tablets, because that's not it's not what I'm telling you my pain is about. And I think that there's also still a discomfort in allowing suicide to have a space. Often when I speak to people, to men who are suicidal, what they in some ways are really craving is just a space for those feelings to be acknowledged, for those feelings to be unpacked and explored, and really understand, somebody to hear what it means for them, inside of them, to have the feeling that they want to die. And I think we still struggle so much being able to hold those conversations in whatever arena that is. And I think that there has to become an ability to hold those conversations. And it's delicate, of course, if like in a healthcare profession, that needs to be able to happen. I understand when that's your husband or your father or your brother, it can be incredibly challenging to have that conversation, because of course the thought that they may act on those feelings is so distressing. So I also, that there's additional research that's also needed for the people that are caring for people in suicidal crisis, to also additionally support them, because what's happening is that there is a knock-on effect. If the health services aren't able to fulfill their role and provide the help, then the other people will step into that space that additionally are potentially not qualified to be able to do those things. But there's so many there's so much variety in men, and therefore there's so many different ways in which different men want to be supported. Like, I know very much, spoken to people, they don't want to talk to anybody. They want privately to get the tools to be able to understand themselves and self-manage their crisis and keep that, privately within themselves.
Insular, really, yeah.
I've spoken to people that peer support has been absolutely critical to them. So things like Talk Club, Andy's Club, those kinds of things, speaking to other men and understanding that what I'm experiencing is not uniquely condemning of me as an individual man. It doesn't mean that I am such profound failure in relation to everybody else that I don't deserve to live anymore. But understanding that there are other men that I maybe admire and respect whose pain I see a taste of my own in. And for, you know, so there's groups of men for whom that's really, you know, important. I've spoken to men where medication has been very beneficial. The problem is that you often, it's a stop and start process, and when you're absolutely on your knees, the idea of someone asking you to keep trying different things just seems so you know, out of reach.
How do we, that I totally agree with everything you're saying, Susie. I'm a big advocate also of like men's spaces to share these things with each other, just so we feel like there are others like us. But how do you reconcile that within like a political landscape where there is a lot of disdain and distrust and dislike for those spaces? They're seen as like hostile or and like misogynistic, or it was like it's like a sort of post the other day where Robin Dunbar, who we all must know, is like he put up research saying men need 2 days, 2 evenings a week spending time with their friends for their health, for their mental health. And that's like, that's not nothing inherently wrong with that at all. I think that's great. And then you go to the comments of that post and it's all people saying, oh my, another day off, oh no, oh incel this and misogyny that, and why not spending time with your wife and family, and there's a lot of shame around the very thing that might actually act as an
antidote, really.
Yeah, exactly. So if part of the solution are these spaces, how do we navigate this landscape where those spaces are also shamed? And perhaps maybe you could speak as someone who is also a woman, of course, and maybe you can sort of see both sides of the coin a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I have to say that until I started doing this work, I just wasn't dialed into the level of hostility that exists, because I was you know, it's so woven into our fabric and normalized. I was in a major museum in London the other day, and in their greeting card section, they had a card that says, I like everyone, and then underneath it, in brackets, even men. And that's like a mainstream London museum. And I thought, how if I went in there and I saw a card that said, I like everyone, and then in brackets, even lesbians, like you're just never going to be allowed to sell that kind of card in that environment. But we can make those kind of jokes about men. And it's really interesting for me. I am a gay woman, and I often, when people are speaking about men in certain situations, or I'm reading posts online, I think if I took out men from that, what's being said, and put in lesbians, what would I be feeling?
Would that be acceptable? Yeah.
Would I feel safe now if on one hand you're telling me something kind of dismissive and stigmatizing and shaming about myself, and then also telling me that I need to speak about the things that I'm most vulnerable about, having been probably potentially kept those things to myself all my life. So the idea, I think, when you've kept things so suppressed, the idea then of being vulnerable about it, about speaking it aloud, is so disorientating, destabilizing. And so then so of course you're just going to send me further away from feeling the psychological safety that I can actually articulate my pain and have it heard with compassion. So I think for me, like, one of the most fundamental critical aspects of this that I think it's incumbent on every single person to sit with, because I know how transformative it has been for myself sitting with it, is this idea so the psychologist I mentioned earlier, Martin Seeger, and a colleague, John Parry, have come up with these ideas about how our empathy is socialized. So how in our societies our empathy is socialized to see men as causing harm more readily than we are to see men as being harmed. So we're more easy to see men as privileged than to see men as being victims of things. And when that happens, the landscape is no longer like this in terms of our compassion. It's like this. And that is so dangerous then, especially for my heart absolutely breaks for I've just been looking at the moment on some data to do with like childhood challenges and suicide risk, because often, like, for a lot of men who are suicidal, really complicated things happen in childhood, a whole variety of different kinds of traumas and adversities. And I think if those young boys experiencing that kind of trauma and pain, then socialized as men to suppress that pain and keep it within themselves, it's such a brutal kind of double compoundment of difficult things, and then being in a cultural and social environment that doesn't view your pain with the same kind of lens as which it might have, of other people's genders. So for me, that's a really that's such a fundamental thing that I think every single human being can start engaging with the work of thinking, how is my empathy being socialized? How am I responding when I'm hearing things about men? How might I be listening to the men in my life differently than I might be listening to the women? And starting to reflect on, our own kind of behaviors around that.
I think that's a good one because you just jogged my memory. Actually, I was reading. Obviously, Prince Harry. Everyone can have their own views on him or whatever else, and I don't really care. But there's a story in the papers. There's some photos of him basically in the nud, and there's a OnlyFans something. I don't know who it is. Some dominatrix from years ago has got photos of him in the nud, and she's threatening to sell them on her OnlyFans. And it's like, okay, well, hold on a minute. Is that not voyeurism or whatever it's called? Because if you think back, there's a guy called Stephen Bear who had sex consensual, who recorded sex in the garden with Georgie something from Love Island, and that bankrupted him. He was in prison, and do you know what? He deserved it. He shouldn't have done it. He or whatever else. So it's like, hold on a minute. So this guy's gone to prison, and he deserved to go to prison for it. Let's just cover that one. Everything was consensual, but recording it and sticking it on the internet was completely and utterly wrong, and that's why he went to prison. I think he's thousands of pounds in debt. But then hold on a minute, and then we've got somebody who's recorded Prince Harry from 2005 in the nod and smoking weed and with his pretending to be an elephant with his todger and all this kind of just a lad being a lad. But the press is saying, "Oh yeah, she's going to sell it on put it onto her OnlyFans." It's like, hold up a minute. And that ever made sense?
Yeah,
totally.
that's a tough
And it's
one,
just
isn't
like, hold up a minute.
it? That's not a tough one.
No, it's not.
No.
Yet again, that's Stephen Bay. He deserved everything that he got. But it's just like, well, come on. If you'd have swapped that for a woman, they would be obliterated for it.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
Or that birthday card thing. Like, I'd love to go back to that shop you mentioned, Susie, the card, and just print off the exact same card, a stack of the same card, but like you said, just change out into lesbian, and just literally just put them in the shop, and then just wait outside, and then I reckon if you came back at the end of the day, that shop would be like on fire.
Oh yeah.
And bankrupt. Like, it'd be protests and riots, and people were like, it wouldn't take long, but.
Yeah,
you see a lot of. I always find birthday cards to be quite.
Don't tempt me, George, because this is a sort of challenge I might take up.
That'd be a great. I mean, that'd be an excellent social experiment.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry about the rampage. I think you just triggered something on. I just remember that story. And
the point's very legit. There has to be consistency around. It's exactly what the point about, like, how we're being socialized to view things. That somehow it's going to be less harmful for Prince Harry than it would be for this other girl, or do you know what I mean? Like, it's outrageous on both sides.
It is, and this is why I no longer call myself a feminist. I call myself an equalist the best I can. I'll probably change that in a few years, but everything has to be 50-50. It really does. We've got to be looking at stuff, as I say, like that postcard, swap out, chuck in lesbian, swap out men, chuck in lesbian, chuck in black man, whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is. Let's start thinking differently.
It's also difficult as well, though, because I mean, I did a post not long ago about how men are portrayed in the media, especially in sitcoms, especially like cartoon sitcoms, and we've gone from a time where we had like amazing TV dads like Dr. Phil, not Dr. Phil, Uncle Phil, not Dr. Phil at all, Uncle Phil and Mr. Rogers and stuff, and now we have like the Homer Simpsons and Peter Griffins and Hal and Jerry, and there's a lot of incompetent dads. And I did a post about showing how our sitcom portrayal of dads has gotten worse and more shaming of men, more humiliating. And I got a lot of comments saying, but we sort of like this part of like fatherhood. We don't mind being made fun of every now and again. We don't want to completely sanitize our TV shows or sitcoms. And I'm the same way, these birthday cards. I don't know if I don't want. I kind of want to see that card, but I also don't want to see that card. I don't want a sanitized version where every single birthday card is just perfectly inoffensive and like a mid-tone grey. But at
Mm.
the same time, I don't want to be insulted every single time I have a birthday. So where is the balance? It's an interesting philosophical question, I suppose.
The fact that we all just have to think about that for a second says it all. I don't think there is ever going to be a balance. I think, like you said, like 50-50, like to get to 50-50, you need to have 70-30 and 90-10, and somewhere in the middle eventually kind of it comes together, you know?
If I turned The Simpsons on and then the next episode Homer was like well-to-do, perfectly, it's a really boring, inoffensive character, I wouldn't watch it, and I wouldn't enjoy it, and I kind of, as part of it, I don't know, I in the whole advocacy thing, but when I hear 50-50, I get afraid of this world where we're going to be just, everything is just exactly the same, and there's no recognizing any sort of individual difference in any single possible way. Everything is split, and that scares me as well. So,
well, maybe it was just 50-50 of just like encouraging everybody just to, up to a point, call stuff out and give their perspective and actually have a discussion about like the cards, the cards or whatever else, or even what I was saying about the Prince Harry and the whole Stephen Bear stuff. Actually, just force those conversations. Say, well, how's that fair?
Yeah, no, totally.
And just talk about it. Is that the same?
But then there's a stigma attached to that, because if you're the one who's calling that out, then you're the one that then gets called a lunatic or an extremist. Or and that's then part of the challenge and the backlash that comes from that. It's an impossible situation, you know, to fix it. But I completely agree with everything that everyone said so far.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we just need to. It's for me. It's just that whole be more emotional and talk to people, and honestly, it really does get on my nerves. It really does get on my nerves, and I've said it's. I feel like I'm constantly on repeat now. And it's just like the minute you start telling me that I need to be, I'm not an emotion. All of you know me pretty well. No, I know George, I've only spoken a couple of times, but I'm not an emotional person. So you telling me that I need to have a good cry and be more emotional, blah 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 blah. I'm gonna stay silent, because what's the point? You're telling me I'm broken, and you're telling me like the years of high function borderline personality disorder or high function depressive, because I'm not dealing with that how society wants me to deal with it. I'm broken. But what's the point of talking to you then? But I will come and have a pint with you. I will go for a walk with you. I'll go and live on a mountain, on the edge of a mountain in minus 13 and whatever. I'll do that, and I'll tell you whether I've had a shit day or not. But don't go cuddling me. I don't want to cuddle.
That's
Well, like
fine by me, by the way.
That's the only reason I'm sat next to you.
He's got his hand on my knee at the moment.
I haven't.
He has.
That's it.
That's not his hand.
Part of the challenge is figuring out for yourself what you need and then being able to communicate to the people around you. Do you know what? And I'm trying to do that more as well. Like, I have to understand I'm somebody that can have moments of real lowness, and I have to take responsibility for that and communicate to the people around me when I'm not in a moment of lowness, because I have therefore the capacity to communicate it. When I go down, these are the things I need. I don't need you giving me a cuddle. I don't need you asking me to sit down and have an emotional heart-to-heart. I want you to take me to the pub and have a pint, or go for a walk, sit on a mountain, whatever it is. Communicating to those people around you how they can kind of
join
support
in.
you. Yeah,
really, and join
be
in,
alongside you. Yeah, in a way that doesn't make you feel even worse about yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
And the other important thing I just wanted to say on that idea about how our empathy is socialized, I completely agree that we need to still be able to have humor and laughter and joy. The danger for me around it is the way in which certain experiences then become invisible. So the way that, for example, men who've experienced sexual abuse or sexual violence, men who've experienced domestic abuse, domestic violence, those things are rendered invisible because of the way, or can be because of the way in which we're sort of socialized to view who those experiences, can happen to. And that, of course, then compounds the isolation for certain men who've lived those realities.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to know, just from this call, I really want to hear about now this funding has been announced. What where is it going? Like, what can we expect to see? What if you had, like, let's say in 5 years' time, where do you see yourself as a newly PhD'd young researcher with aspirations for changing the world? I want to hear all about it.
I mean, I really want to take on this question of looking at male loneliness and male isolation and understanding, you know, the data that I've explored and the stories I've heard, it kind of falls across a spectrum of men who are really visibly in their lives excluded and on the margins and lacking human connection, to men who are deeply embedded in relationships with people, but are emotionally isolated and lonely within those experiences. So trying to understand how, I mean, for me, it's so absurd. I understand things like cancer, we don't understand. Like but there's a certain limitation to our knowledge. And so we're victim to it until our knowledge is such that we can start dealing with it. But we know how, we are the cure. We are the cure for loneliness. Like, that is inside of each of us, to be the cure for another person's loneliness. So the fact that that can be contributing because of the way that we're engineering our societies and cultures and our relationships with one another, the fact that that can be such a potentially powerful contributing factor to people's deaths and pain is something that's just kind of absurd to me. And that's why I say this in almost every talk I ever do, but I love these community groups. I love people taking care of one another for no other reason than because we're all going through this crazy human experience with each other, and we have this capacity within ourselves to care about things and people external to us. So, and I love as well, like, for me, the work that I do is fueled by my pain of the experiences I've had and people that I love have had. And I think that pain is such a powerful force that if it can be directed, like, Dan, what's being created at MANUP is, I think, fueled by the pain that you experience and the numbers of, you know, as you said, the numbers of funerals that you went to. And it, you know, your pain can make you do such horrendous, violent, dangerous things, but it can also send you in another direction of, like, creating real kind of beauty and hope. And so when I see people channeling their pain in that way, I just want to be a part of it. And it makes me want to carry on living, basically. Like, it makes me see what's redemptive about, you know. So I think, and I see that there's so many seeds of that growing. And I think that's the bit that gives me kind of optimism for the future. And so I'm interested as well, like, how those connections can be cultivated and expanded.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's, I think for me personally, he's. What did you hear? Did you just breathe heavy or something?
That was my shoe.
Oh, right, okay. So sorry. It sounded really weird, so I apologise. But for me, what frustrates me is I think we need to be promoting these little communities more, rather than sending everybody to the Samaritans and the Mines and whatever else. Actually embrace all of these little communities, the Andes Man Clubs and the Woods stuff. And there's one up the road, they do, like, it's like a 3D printing group. For me, just sounds absolutely. I've got a 3D printer upstairs, but I don't want to join the group one. But do you know what? If it helps that, but if it helps that tribe, it's not. So why aren't we, rather than saying, yeah, give us 50 quid for this charity and we'll do nothing for it other than make ourselves richer? Say, do you know what? We can tell you a bit geeky. Do you want to go to that 3D printing group? Everyone just needs to start engaging more. Have I just made a point, or?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. And that's, there's almost anyone this is why I think suicide prevention is everything and everywhere, because anything has the potential to help somebody, even momentarily, ease their pain. So if you, whatever your passion or hobby is, there's a way in which that you can bring people into that and give them a sense of connection and community. I'm not saying it's going to solve everything that's called, you know, if you've got complex childhood trauma, you've got addiction issues, or you've got struggling to get a job, of course it can't, you know, you know, fix everything like that. But there are
But
ways
even
in
that,
which,
but even that change of mindset for quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, no, it doesn't matter. It just gives people a glimpse into the fact that not everything is dark,
yes, exactly,
surely.
And it's like, I
100%.
know you're a big fan of the visual metaphor, Susie. I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
paint us a few later. But like, I know you talked about like, it's like taking the lid off the saucepan and letting some of the heat out. Like, yeah, the hob's still on, that because that's a separate problem, but you're allowing someone to express something
Cool
they're
off a
dealing
bit.
with.
Yeah,
Cool off, and like, yeah, the lid has to go back on the saucepan eventually. But
yeah,
even if just 20 minutes, it's like it's better than nothing. And that can
yeah,
make that can and does make the difference. And
yeah.
like I said, that's very different to the issue that might be causing that pain, but it's a
And
really,
yeah,
really important first step.
yeah, and there's the thing I've yeah, again, I use my I feel like I'm just constantly on repeat these days. I really do. Even with me, like my wife Faye will tell me to go wild camping because she's like,
Right.
Dan, I can tell you're cracking. Go, I need you to go race it. Like when we first got together, she was basically, I think it did kill me. Like I raced motorbikes and I basically had a massive accident and all this kind of stuff. The photos are incredible, but anyway, so she kind of like banned me from like racing, and then after a while she was like, "No, I get it. If I'd go out on my road bike, like I know you ride yourself, but when I go with the lads ragging around the countryside or whatever else for like 2 hours and come back, she's like, now I get it."
Mm.
And now she's like, go racing, go wild camping, go and do your stupid blokey stuff.
Yes.
So no, it just basically picks you up and gives you a good shake, so you can get rid of the non-importance shit
Yes.
and come back and go, right, this is what I need to do.
Yes.
I just think as a society, we're
Yes.
not we're just training people to watch other people's live their lives rather than actually living our own.
Yeah. And also, Dan, what I love is such a beautiful, for me, gesture of love on behalf of your wife to want to understand how you work and not reading how you work as how she thinks you should work
Yeah.
in that way of like, I remember speaking to a guy who said he had like a family and he was under immense stress and pressure, and he was like, when I come home I need to play video games for several hours because it's the one moment in my day where my brain has stopped, and that violence that is just rattling around in my brain is kind of just quiet for a moment. And exactly what George was saying about like just taking the lid off the pan. Now I think for a lot of women they would read that behavior and be like, turn that off, talk to me, you know, A, B, C, and D, because they don't understand what that behavior is doing for that person in terms of how they're regulating, you know, what's going on for them.
Well,
And so
self-regulating, yeah.
exactly, self-regulating, exactly that. And so I think that the more, that's sort of going back to my earlier point about the more information that we can understand about our own self-regulation, that we can then communicate to the people that we love to be like, this is a behavior I do because it's giving me time out of mind. And it may not be a behavior that looks like that for you. I know that there are limits where we can say that actually looks like it's going to be destructive and damaging. So I'm always there's a moderation to it. But like, you know, I've said this before, like when I'm in incredibly stressful periods of my life, and I think, Susie, you should cry now. And it's like I can't cry. And then I'll watch the football and I will cry. I can't cry over the thing that warrants the tears, but like listening to the Liverpool fans sing "You'll Never Walk Alone," I release the emotion that I needed to release 2 days ago.
2 days ago, yeah.
I couldn't. And that's how I know now that that's how I regulate myself. And I can say to the people in my life, I need to watch the football because it's part of how I self-regulate.
Exactly that. But do you find that if I flip that on there, there'll be people will be like, well, you're a woman, so you shouldn't. That's not what you should be doing.
What, watching the football?
As in watching the football and using it. That's the. Have you ever had that?
No, I've never had it. I don't think I've ever had it, but I mean, yeah, I don't know how I would I mean, I know that it's not, you know, the healthy way would be that I just express my feelings in the moment, but like I have learned behaviors and that are very ingrained now, so it's just like
But for you, that is your healthy way.
Yes, exactly. In the context of who I've been
Yeah.
and the experiences that I've had and the coping strategies I've developed, this is my healthy way of dealing.
Exactly, and I think that's,
with it.
and I think this is hopefully what this research over the next year will just force upon people.
Yeah.
Here's the bloody data. You can ignore it if you can ignore it if you want. The trouble is people do ignore data. That's the problem. I've shown stuff on websites and all sorts of people just don't like it. But
That's what I think is the unifying theme of what you've just been talking about, is that no one group of people is a monolith. There is no one singular type of any single person. Susie is not your typical woman. Of course, she loves football, for example. But there is also no singular type of man, and that men are often seen as like a monolithic group and never seen as individuals. Like, we always hear about this concept of men, and I'm like, I always want to know who is men? Like, who are you actually talking about? Like, what, all 4 billion men combined into one single monolithic blob? Obviously, that doesn't make sense, because men are all individuals and all shaped by our personal experiences. We all have different needs and different ways of expressing ourselves and different ideas and childhood experiences. We've all had our own different journeys, and it's nice that through Susie's research and research in general, we can sort of turn up the resolution on male suicide and actually see men as individual people rather than just one blob that only wants one thing and only needs one thing. Because where we talk about suicide currently is it is very just one single answer, and there are no easy answers. Like I've been asking Susie for answers to male suicide every time I talk to her, and we always speak for hours, and we've known each other for years, and we've never arrived at one single answer for male suicide. And
and you never will.
We never will, because there is no one single man. And
and
what works for you guys might not work for me. What works for me might not work for you. And not only is the funding important for that, but like what Susie said at the beginning, like it's all down to all of us to see men as individuals and having individual needs and individual ways of expressing themselves. Like, I express myself a little bit like Susie mentioned, like very difficult crier. But that doesn't mean I don't feel anything. And like I'd feel as much as the most the most crying of men. But I think I just want to encourage people to see men as individuals rather than just like a single unit of men. And I always appreciate that from Susie's work and how it does respect the individualism of a men and our individual experiences.
So how do we summarize all of this then?
What do you mean?
Well, how do we summarize our conversation? I mean, normally we have in your situation, what would you suggest that people do? Don't we?
Well,
generally, but I suppose in this situation, what we're saying is, we're funding Susie to go and find out some of these things, and to come back with a I don't know, like a sort of a roadmap or some more exploring questions that hopefully we can try to find some answers to.
Yeah.
Would that be fair, Susie?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're doing this for I know, Dan, you want to kind of close the charity eventually, but I think we might be doing this for the rest of our lives, basically. But hopefully with more and more clarity and impact around, what we're doing. And, I do just want to say as well, just first of all, tremendous thank you to George, because he has helped the work enormously through the promotion that he did when I was running studies, and just being a massive advocate, and and on a personal level, because there's times when it feels it's been so isolating, because you feel very it's just been painful at times, and having George's companionship in that has been very meaningful. And then obviously, to Dan, Ian, all the team at MANUP, like, this is unbelievable what this funding represents for me, and I receive it with a real acknowledgement of what it represents in terms of where the money has come from, and what we are all committed to do in terms of paying it forward and making it meaningful in the world. Like, I think that's what we're all driven by, is like, how do we make this meaningful
Mm.
in terms of the lived reality, you know, the people that this is their
To
this is
affect and to help
yeah,
and
exactly.
to guide, I suppose, also as well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Susie. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's another thing we have in common is that you and I both don't enjoy compliments. So, fuck you. I'll pay it back. I mean, I'll pay it back with an even bigger compliment. But I mean, obviously, I mean, I've been in this space now for about 3 or 4 years, and I mean, I'm lucky to have met lots of different people, and it has often been a very demoralizing experience, and something that Susan and I obviously spoken about a lot, and how difficult it is and lonely and isolating.
Yeah.
You do often feel like everyone's going crazy apart from you. And there were a lot of people in this space that I've personally found to be very disingenuous and to be more looking out for themselves. And I've always said, like, I count on one hand how many people I genuinely have met in a space that I genuinely think are doing everything right and have the best of intentions and would do it without any money. And like others for people, Susie's like that one. But now, like, after school, I may have to bring in a second hand. And like, it's great meeting new faces, and maybe, you know, who knows, maybe a few fingers. But the point is that there aren't enough people around in a space, and I'm 100% confident that this money is going to be well spent. But at the same, I want to temper that with a bit of expectation management that this is going to be a long-term thing. Like, we may never see the results of this in our lifetime, but I still think it's an amazing thing. And this is the beginning. This is like,
Yeah, but George, you know, one, we've got to start somewhere, and two, you know, I've always been told, you know, when you get massive projects, you nibble away, you take tiny little chunks, and you nibble away at the little chunks, and that way you feel some sort of sense of achievement. The fact that you've only got 3% of the way through your 100% doesn't matter. It's from a state of mind, I suppose. You know, just nibble away at little bits, and you know what we get out of the end of this 3 months, 6 months, year, you know, however long it takes for stuff to start coming out, surely that's all got to be good.
There will always, I mean, again, I mean, I also work with a lot of academics in my life, like so many academics, in, not just the TinMen, but in my professional life, like hundreds and hundreds. And often the question that always stumps them is when I ask them, like, why does that matter to me? Like, outside of your lab, your research really means nothing. Sorry to break it to you. Vanity project, I'd often call it. Not Susie. Because I know you hate being called an academic, and I will not call you an academic, because your work has actual meaning. And I feel like, so for someone that isn't like that, and having met that person hundreds of times, I can recognize that Susie's work is like, she understands it has to have utility outside of the lab, most importantly, outside the lab. And if it's not changing the lives of men on the ground, then what is the point? And that's where it's complete odds with the wider male suicide sort of industry, where it is often self-serving. But when I see Susie, she's like obviously serving men, and I find that not only is the research interesting, but it's formulated in a way where you actually get useful outcomes that can actually be used to reduce suicide and actually used to help men. It's not just like a meaningless vanity project. It's it's the exact opposite. So yeah, I mean, it's great.
No, it's good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. I just want to be like, we can't just come back next year and be like, right, is it solved yet, Susie? Because obviously, neither. But at the same time, obviously, amazing things will come out of it straight away. But the wider problem itself is obviously a huge issue, a much bigger picture than anyone can solve.
And on that bombshell,